welcome to the stage Sjoerd, I can't pronounce your surname, Sjoerd, Director, Sustainability, Strategy, Excellence, Adhesive Technologies at Henkel, and Matt and John from co-founders at Plastic Climate Future.
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here and especially a pleasure to have such a seasoned representative of one of the most successful chemical companies with us. Some of you might have seen us already, so we ask a lot of questions, so that's what we're going to continue. That's our specialty. And I think the first question that I wanted to ask first, how do you pronounce your first name correctly for non-Dutch speaking people?
Yeah. Well, I always blame my parents for not giving me an international name, but it's Sjoerd. But many people struggle, so I listen to everything which comes close to T-shirt, to Stuart, or whatever. I mean, everything that comes close, I typically listen to it. So don't worry too much for that. But I must admit, Matt and John, John and Matt, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, I'm not gonna disclose my full name, so might lead to another discussion. Yeah, we are here today because we have a common cause. We are somehow always involved into bioeconomy. And one of the questions that we're talking about and we provide solutions is how do we shift away from fossil-based raw materials? And now having the chance to have Sjoerd with me, why is Henkel on this mission and what are the biggest hurdles in shifting away from fossil-based raw materials in terms of performance, supply chain availability and customer awareness?
Yeah, super great question. And first of all, I think Henkel, not many people know Henkel, but I mean, we have a consumer brands business and an adhesives business. I mean, we're one of the global leaders in adhesives, and I also work for the adhesives part, but we're also a family-owned company. And the fact that Henkel is already, we're coming very close, just a couple of years, we're away from our 150th anniversary, 150. Yeah, so and as a family company, we're still majority held by the Henkel family. And this is, I think, a unique combination where in this space of chemicals and consumer applications, which in combination with the family-owned structure that makes Henkel wanting to be a pioneer for the next generations. We want to do good for the generations to come because Henkel as a family wants to take care for the future generations. And I think that's one of the biggest drivers actually for behind the sustainability strategy of Henkel.
Mm. And what are the hurdles or what are the challenges that you're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, there are many hurdles, right? But let me first unravel a little bit what we mean with it and what are the important pillars for sustainability. So, and if we look at it, I think our sustainability strategy focuses around a few themes. One of course, climate change, right? We really have to step up our game in order to mitigate the impacts we have on climate, right?
Got that right.
The second is we have a huge problem with environmental human health, which spans from plastic and plastic waste, you also get that, as well as, but also don't underestimate the impact chemicals could have on the environment or on human health. I mean, we have seen very big issues around PFAS and these kind of chemicals that are causing massive troubles in the environment. So that's another big driver. So I think climate circularity links to these problems. And then the third element, as I said, around responsible chemistry and safety in order to also make the products safer. And that is the core of our strategy. And I think there are basically two hurdles we see. One is actually the massive sheer transformation that is required to drive this change. I mean, we are operating within a basically fossil-dominated environment or raw material stream. So I think roughly 95% of the raw materials we use originate from fossil resources. And you see there that actually that has been optimized for the last 100 years. And so we talk about big commoditized raw materials that are optimized at a very cost-effective structure. Yep. So in order to break that through, and that is part to the challenges, I think we have to diversify our raw material base. Next to, instead of fossils, we should be using CO2-based, renewable bio-based raw materials. We could be either biochemistry-based or, for example, mass balance-based or biomass-based. And then the third element is based on recycled raw materials, keeping the products back in the stream. And getting this all up at the level of the sheer size of where we need these ingredients, I think that's super challenging.
Okay. Well, that's what a good start. Already learning a lot here today. I think we've heard at this conference, and we hear in other places over the past, year or so, the shifting of the word decarbonization to defossilization. And I think that most of you already knew this coming in here. Certainly you know it now with what's been said at the conference. But indeed, we were going through the Henkel slides, and look at what we found. Carbon is not the problem. And, the last time I checked, I'm made of a lot of carbon, and you're made of a lot of carbon.
Yes.
I think you're silicon, right? No, carbon as well.
I'm a robot. So.
Yeah. So I mean, carbon is not the problem. It is the source from where we get it, the need for defossilization, of course. And as you say here in your material from Henkel, carbon's not the problem, it's the source.
Yep.
And how can the chemical industry, how can Henkel make a difference leading to the transition to renewable carbon?
Yep.
Is I think the question of the day.
Yep.
And also, how do you account for the shifting away from fossilized raw materials to bio-based materials? How do you, if you will, credit for that?
Yep. So it's absolutely a valid point, and this is a teaser we often put in the world in order to say, like, yeah, but carbon-based chemistry is not the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. So you could look at this from two angles. One is the source you use, and the second is the emissions cost. Because I'm not going to deny here that CO2 emission is causing a huge problem in climate. It's true. So but if you look at the value chain as itself, you can separate process emissions from the whole fossil upstream value chain, which is predominantly caused by electricity and by heat. It can be low heat and high heat temperatures in order to do your chemical processes. And then there is a bit on the source. And currently, we unfortunately have the situation that a lot of the sources is still fossil-based, which it's either gas, coal, or oil. And that is where the dominance of petrochemicals is being based on. And I think we need to transition away from that, but that's also, I mean, we want to lead that, and we want to, but foremost, we need partnerships across this whole industry to actually make that work. Yeah. And this is something, and I think it's twofold. Because of the size of the problem of climate change, we also need to look at the process emissions in the chemical industry. You can already reduce a lot of the impact by reducing that, but we got to be looking further to what the source is. And I already mentioned, I think there are three forms of renewable sources: bio-based, CO2-based, and recycle-based.
Yeah, right.
And that is something where, but it's also we have to admit that there are two things. One is it's still in its infancy. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you'd be surprised about the amount of solutions that are already there and we already can bring to the market. And if in terms of solutions, I think you should separate two solutions. One is focusing on drop-in replacements, basically finding a bio-based originated or a CO2 or recycle-based raw material that is identical to the fossil one, and you can just basically swap. You have the same product, same performance, etc. And then the other stream is basically where innovation kicks in, and that is looking for new monomers and new polymers based on renewable ingredients. And that is where innovation is still having a lot of headroom. And the ideal is then you create better performance or ultimately also better price elements. Yep. But that's if you then translate that back to the challenges, if you have a drop-in replacement, I need to be putting it on the table. The biggest challenge is the competition and the price game you're in versus fossils. And you can debate a lot what the price game actually of fossil is. Are you comparing it with the real price? Because we also heard already before this morning that actually the CO2 not accounted for in the price of a product is a huge limiting factor. Yeah, so you can debate whether it's the real price, the true price you account for, but in the end, that's an important driver competing it to the fossil-based alternatives. And then you have the new versions, which sometimes come with improved performance. We have great examples here of solutions, for example, for the wood cross-laminated timber industry, where there is a big transition in the building and construction sector towards bio-based, wood-based structures, and we can facilitate that transformation with bio-based adhesives. And there you find yourself in a situation where you look at new innovations that need a certain amount of time to get traction in the market, to be coming to scale, etc. And I think those two distinct problems for the two distinct categories of solutions.
Yeah, I think just quickly before turning it over to Matt here, what was said yesterday at the keynote by Michael Karras from Renewable Carbon from Nova, I think is really important, and that is that words matter. Definitions of words matter. And I had a professor that once said to me, if you can't explain it, you don't understand it. And I said, what do you mean? So I think that's important. A key word that you said is the word transition from fossil-based sources. I mean, this is going to take time. This is part of why we're here, of course, and the innovations that are in place to make this transition occur. So I think transition is a word that needs to be highlighted a bit in this discussion. So.
Yeah, now that you talked about a professor, I also had a professor, and he told me that the most important material property is the price.
Yeah.
How do you, like, also in terms of being competitive, how do you incorporate bio-based solution into your net zero strategy, and especially how do you account for bio-based solutions to achieve your net zero goals?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think I'm not one of the biggest drivers at this moment in time for this transition is the greenhouse gas savings. We as Henkel have very aggressive SBTi sustainability targets. That's a funny picture. I mean, I think next time you should use a glue so that you can, from Henkel, that you don't see the tape. Yeah,
you're the sticky business. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. But that, anyhow, but so that's the part where the biggest driver, I think, is our climate strategy. As I said, along with our circularity ambition to move towards renewable resources, but I think in terms of accounting and making it simple, I think the drive for net zero is one of the biggest drivers. But what you see here, and which is a big challenge when you look at bio-based ingredients, is the way how that's being accounted for. So if you look at SBTi or climate targets from companies, you typically have the greenhouse gas protocol that is setting the way how you calculate the carbon emissions. And luckily so, because the first part has been typically focused only on scope 1 and 2. So what are you actually directly emitting as a company? Now the scope is extending towards including scope 3, including your raw materials. But there's something really weird going on in that calculation, because if you actually have the biogenic uptake that go into the CO2 amount that goes into growing plants, and you use the plants later, greenhouse gas protocol says you don't take that into account. So you assume that uptake is 0, and then at the end of life, they say your release of carbon is also 0. So you end up with 0, 0, which is okay. But then they say, if you compare it with fossil-based, they also say, because the oil you drill out of the ground is not causing any emission. So they say you also start with 0 on that end. But then they say you get a plus emission when you, at the end of life, use that as in terms of at the end of life for that carbon. And I'm not going to make a very technical story long, but I think this is a very fundamental flaw in the way how we do this accounting, because what happens is that the minute you start recycling, and what is recycling is already heat recovery. So basically, you would be stupid to burn waste and not to recover your heat. And if you do heat recovery, that emission from fossil-based also goes to zero. So also you end up with 0,0 compared to bio, which is also 0,0. So in the accounting for companies that have a net zero target, it's very hard to take renewable raw materials into account. So I think we should be, and then you have product carbon footprints, and there you can take the biogenic uptake into account. But if companies cannot overarchingly take that into account in their overall accounting, I think that's a huge flaw. And that we as Henkel have put a position paper out there that we want that accounting to be changed, actually.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it's also very important to have the right definitions.
Yes.
Going beyond now Henkel and looking at the entire industry, that's why the tape is maybe not the Henkel tape. But how do you see like the broader changes that are necessary to adopt bio-based solutions for the plastics industry in general? Yeah,
I think first of all, let's start also with ourselves and with our customers and with our suppliers. I think it's a business game. I think that stands for it, right? We have to make sure we make money. We have to make sure we are profitable. But we also have to realize that it comes at a price. Yeah. So we talk about price premiums, and then we say, yeah, but my customer doesn't want to pay that premium, so I cannot ask a premium, and then they go to the supplier, and there are a few in the rooms, I mean, where these discussions currently taking place, and then we said, yeah, but we actually compare you to a fossil alternative, and then we can't pay more than the alternative, and then they say, yeah, but we have a bio-based, more eco-friendly solution. So, but we can't provide it cheaper, and this is the constant battle we have. And I think as a value chain, we just need to accept. All of us need to put something on the table. All of us need to swallow a little bit of that pain from our customers to our suppliers to ourselves in order to make this transition going. So that's one. Look at ourselves and look at the value chain and do it together and find ways to adopt this. Then the second element, I think we can also accelerate big time what you've seen with the transition of electricity and with solar, that with very smart interventions, you can do a whole lot. So we already talked about in the EU with the Green Deal, but also in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act. There is now a lot of investment going into these type of setting up the infrastructure, setting up the production capacity. Because if you want to change it big time, the transformation, you also need that capacity and that volume. So it could be supported a lot with strategic investments. And I think that's a very mindful element, because we're not only looking at making a better climate, but also look at the health of the chemical industry in Europe at this moment. That's not very healthy. And that's because we have based our entire chemical industry in Europe on basically oil and gas from fragile states or unfriendly states. And I think it's just a whole lot more healthier to have a more mid to long term focus, also strategically as governments, in order to make sure you have a solid supply of feedstock. And I think the transition to bio-based chemicals can do a very, very good job here. So that is more strategically in terms of incentivizing, but also finding a forced mechanism to say you need to introduce, if you make plastic, it needs to be a certain amount of renewable, it needs to be a certain amount of bio-based. So just putting out those requirements. And then I think, which is also very interesting, which is often forgotten, I think the transparency regulations that are currently going on, and there are a few, CSRD is one, CSDDD, the taxonomy, but also on the product level or with product declarations. We just this morning heard about product claims. I think this is all regulations focused around transparency. And I mean, I was on this stage, Paul, 2 years back in Barcelona when we said, well, I have no, I mean, always people ask if you move towards renewable raw materials, where is it coming from? Are you sure you're not cutting rainforests? And that's a very legitimate question. We should make sure we don't do harm when making this shift. But nobody has ever asked me, and still not, I mean, I announced it on the stage, but nobody has asked me, where is your oil coming from? And I think the request for transparency, we now see what these CSRD is giving. I mean, we have a supplier from India. They're in the room. I'm looking at Sangeeta at this moment, and I want to highlight that because Godavari is an excellent supplier which is working directly with the farmers in India. They can take me around and show this is the farmer who's giving you the sugar, and we make that into a chemical. That is just impossible if you look at oil and gas. And that level of transparency from CSRD is now going to be required by companies like us, that we are not doing any harm in our upstream value chain. And if you know the challenges with oil and gas from environment, from you have cancer alleys, you have subsidizing unstable regimes, I think it's going to be that level of transparency is also going to be a key in as a driver into this transformation.
I would say in closing, with people like you and companies like Henkel, I'm certainly an optimist that these things are going to happen. So
yeah, thanks.
Thank you for the time.
Thanks a lot, and thanks to the audience.